promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and across the world on wadr.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. Health experts express optimism about Africa's vaccine production capabilities as the Gavi summit opens in France.
Africa makes only less than 1% of the vaccines that are needed on the continent, and this represents only about 0.2% of the vaccines that are needed globally around the world. So during this summit, there will be the launch of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator.
Senegal scores a favorable economic outlook from the IMF with a caution on the inflation rate.
For
2025, subsidiary growth is at an average of 4%, while Senegal is above 10%. Similarly, for inflation, for 2024 and 2025, subsidiary growth is above 10%.
President Embalo of Guinea-Bissau orders partial border closure with Senegal to de-escalate tension after Monday's violence between two communities, and Malian Prime Minister Maïga allies himself with the M5 memorandum critical of the military but reiterates support for Colonel Assimi Goïta. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Abdullahi Hassan with Newslink.
Thank you for joining our broadcast and welcome to our listeners in Gambia, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Today, Thursday, June 20, is the opening of the Global Forum for Vaccine Sovereignty and Innovation in France. The event is co-organized by the African Union AU and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. The event aims to assess vaccine production in Africa as well as to work on vaccine sovereignty on the continent. $1 billion is funding expected at the forum to facilitate the production of at least 60% of vaccine doses in Africa by 2040. Senegal, one of the vaccine hubs in sub-Saharan Africa, is attending this summit, which leads us to the question of how the country and the continent at large benefit. Professor Charles Wionsong, head of the Vaccine Research Center at the WHO Regional Office for Africa, responds.
Well, let me just start by saying that Africa has a population of about 1 billion people, and this is about 18% of the population of the world. Despite that, Africa makes only less than 1% of the vaccines that are needed on the continent, and this represents only about 0.2% of the vaccines that are needed globally around the world. So during this summit, which is organized by the French government, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the African Union, there will be the launch of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator, which is a mechanism to help launch vaccine manufacturing in Africa. So it is important.
Professor Charles Wionsong, head of the Vaccine Preventable Diseases Program at the WHO Regional Office for Africa. He will be joining us much later in the news as our guest. Meanwhile, Senegal's economy is set to grow by an estimated 10.1%, while inflation is set to fall by 2%. These were the findings of a mission from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which has been in Dakar since the beginning of June. On Wednesday, the Bretton Woods institution presented the second review of the Senegalese government's economic reform program. Imo Edet explains.
According to the mission of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Senegal's economic growth projections were not achieved in 2024. The country only managed to achieve a figure of 7.1% compared with the 8.3% initially forecast. The International Financial Institution also points out that Senegal's budget deficit, initially estimated at 3.9%, will be 4.6% of gross domestic product (GDP). This is due to several factors, including interest payment on debt servicing and increased allocations for energy subsidies. Despite these, estimates for 2025 look optimistic. Edouard Gamayel is head of the International Monetary Fund's mission in Senegal.
For 2025, subsidiary growth is at an average of 4%, while Senegal is above 10%. Similarly, for inflation, for 2024 and 2025, subsidiary growth is above 10%, while Senegal will be at 2% next year. Secondly, as we have always said, it is important to reduce the level of debt, which we always consider to be a sustainable debt. And thirdly, to also contain inflation. As I said earlier, Senegal has much lower inflation rates than other countries in the region or even in sub-Saharan Africa.
Senegal has signed a 2023-2026 program with the IMF worth 150 billion CFA francs. For the first review, the country had access to 169 billion CFA francs from the IMF, according to the global financial lender. By mid-July, Senegal could benefit from a further 230 billion CFA francs.
Imo added with that report. President Umaru Sissoko Embalo of Guinea-Bissau has ordered the partial closure of the country's border with Senegal following a deadly clash between two border Muslim communities earlier this week. One person was reported killed and 20 others were injured when the violence erupted in the town of Medina Gonas, situated in the south of Senegal. The two communities have long been at loggerheads over control of the local main mosque and accuse each other of being at the root of tensions that have led to several deaths in the past. Embalo explained that the measure was to prevent any escalation of Monday's fighting because one of the communities had called for reinforcement from Bissau. Medina Gonas is a few kilometers from Guinea-Bissau and hosts an annual 10-day pilgrimage attended by thousands of Muslims. Senegal and Guinea-Bissau share a 200-kilometer border. And we head to Mali now as Prime Minister Choguel Kokala Maïga speaks out on the arrest of his mission manager and Secretary General of the M5 movement, Boubacar Traoré. In prison awaiting trial, Traoré was arrested at the end of May after signing a memorandum critical of the ruling military. The M5 political movement, to which Maïga belongs, had expressed its disagreement with the extension of the transition. Francis Boniface reports.
At a meeting last Tuesday with members of the M5, the movement he chairs, Prime Minister Choguel Maïga endorsed the political movement memorandum critical of the ruling military. The memorandum was signed at the end of May by Boubacar Traoré, M5 Secretary General and Mission Manager at the Prime Minister's office. While the pro-Choguel Maïga M5 is opposed to extending the military transition recommended during the inter-Malian dialogue, the Prime Minister has nonetheless reiterated the need to support the President of the transition, Colonel Assimi Goïta. He denounced attempts to pit him against the ruling military and attempts at manipulation aimed in his view at creating conflict at the top between the military and the Prime Minister and presenting him as the
of the 197 officers is part of Nigeria's contribution to maintaining peace and security in the ECOWAS member state. This comes after a 6-week pre-employment training as recommended by the UN core pre-deployment training modules. WEDR's Sankule Janko reports that this is not Nigeria's first deployment to the country since the launch of ECOMIC in 2017.
The Nigerian Army has deployed 197 soldiers to the Gambia as part of a peacekeeping mission aimed at maintaining stability and ensuring peace within the region. This deployment is under the auspices of the Economic Community of West African States mission in the Gambia ECOMIC, a regional initiative established to support the Gambian government in fostering a secure environment following the political crisis in 2016-2017. The contingent, drawn from various units of the Nigerian Army, is equipped with the necessary training and resources to handle peacekeeping operations effectively. Their primary objectives include supporting the Gambian armed forces in maintaining public order, protecting civilians, and facilitating humanitarian assistance where necessary. Nigeria's participation in ECOMIC underscores its commitment to regional security and peace. As one of the largest contributors to peacekeeping missions in Africa, Nigeria plays a pivotal role in ensuring the success of such initiatives. The deployment also reflects Nigeria's strategic interest in promoting peace and security across West Africa, reinforcing its position as a key player in regional diplomacy and conflict resolution. Also deployed in the Gambia since the change of government in 2017 are Ghanaian and Senegalese soldiers. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sankula Janki reporting from Banjul.
Elsewhere, the Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire, PDCI, has denied and rejected any intention of joining forces with the ruling RHDP party for the next presidential election. The political party of the late Henri Konan Bedi made this clear to the press on Wednesday while calling on its supporters to register ahead of the presidential ballot in 2025. H.R. Tisu has won this report by WADR's Abidjan correspondent Albin Ade.
The Democratic Party of Ivory Coast, PDCI, does not intend to ally itself with the ruling Democratic Rally for Democracy and Peace, RHDP, in the next presidential election. Tijani Thiam supporters say they are disappointed with the previous alliance. Bredumi Kwasi Sumaila is spokesman for PDCI.
President Henri Konan Bedi has declared that he is at the end of his life. It's not up to us to experiment with what he planned failed to achieve. My boss didn't tell me that the first option would be the RSDP, but the other opposition parties, I think, saw this desire expressed at President Henri Konan Bedi's funeral. We are going to refine it because the country is calling us. There are misunderstandings from the past and we are going to clear them up and move forward.
The Democratic Party of Ivory Coast, PDCI, also calls on its militants to register massively on the electoral lists. Regarding the reform of the Independent Electoral Commission, Côte d'Ivoire's oldest party is calling on other opposition parties to unite to avoid, and I quote, another crisis, unquote. In 2010, the PDCI and the RHDP formed an alliance for the presidential election. However, by 2019, the PDCI, under the leadership of late Henri Konan Bedi, issued a statement announcing its withdrawal from the coalition and proceeded to present candidates in the regional and municipal elections under its banner.
A report filed in by WADR's Albin Ade in Abidjan and voiced by H.A. Atisu. A peace researcher with the University of Cape Coast in Ghana is warning that stereotyping and exclusion of minority tribes, particularly of Fulani extraction, could be breeding ground for terror recruitment in the country. Aside from regular arrests for crimes, Fulani herdsmen whose cattle have destroyed crops of farming communities have often resulted in clashes. The analysts indicate that instead of attempting to contain such excesses, urgent steps are needed to include them in Ghana's development efforts. From Accra, WADR's Nadir Tete reports.
According to the West African Center for Counterterrorism, recent attacks in Benin, Togo, and La Côte d'Ivoire show terrorists' determination to expand beyond landlocked Sahel countries where the insurgency has devastated lives and property over the last decade. Reports indicate that Ghana is becoming a haven for terror groups to trade seized goods, find safe havens, receive medical care, and escape anti-terrorism operations. Security experts warn that Ghana cannot afford to be complacent. Dr. Kadir Bukari Nwaga of the University of Cape Coast highlights the threats of internal terror recruitments targeting disgruntled Fulani communities especially.
The idea of homegrown terrorists, people being recruited to join groups itself should be something that we should be worried about. Now, in the case of Ghana, I always use the situation of how some minority groups are being treated. A number of them feel aggrieved, and most of them do not feel part of our society. How do we bring them to part of our society such that nobody elsewhere comes to take them and then use them as a bait to attack us?
Fresh in Ghana's memory is a July 2023 WhatsApp video by a Ghanaian-born Fulani, Ali Judani, who joined JNIM, a West African jihadi insurgents group affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Dr. Nwaga commends Ghana for initiatives like the See Something, Say Something campaign, the deployment of 2 battalions and forward operating bases to the northern borders, and the Accra Initiative, which collaborates with neighboring countries to prevent terrorist movement southward. However, he stresses the need for a more inclusive country to bridge the inequality gap that leaves northern Ghana underdeveloped and impoverished.
With motorbikes and monies and other inducements, some of them are being recruited into these terrorist cells. Another issue that we may need to look at is the issue of our porous borders.
For WADR, Nadidi Tete, Accra.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Health experts express optimism about Africa's vaccine production capabilities as the Gavi summit opens in France. Senegal scores a favorable economic outlook from the IMF with a caution on the inflation rate. President Embalo of Guinea-Bissau orders partial border closure with Senegal to de-escalate tension after Monday's violence between two communities. Malian Prime Minister Maiga aligns himself with the M5 memorandum critical of the military but reiterates support for the transitional president Colonel Simi Goita. Still ahead in the news, Nigeria seeks an 18-month extension on the closing date of the World Bank $800 million palliative loan. We have the press review, guest interview, and a sports update. Please stay with us.
You are listening to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal.
Many thanks for staying with us. The Nigerian government has requested an 18-month extension on the closing date of the World Bank's $800 million palliative loan to boost its social safety net programs. With this loan, the government plans to run a monthly cash transfer program for poor and vulnerable Nigerians who have been hit hard by recent policies such as the fuel subsidy removal. But it was abruptly stopped following a probe of alleged malfeasance in the management of the scheme by the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation earlier this year. According to a restructuring document, Nigeria requested for an extension of the closing date of the project from initially set for June 30, 2024 to December 31, 2025. Oge Berika has the rest of the details.
The request from the Nigerian government comes in the wake of the country's battle against rising inflation, which is at a record high of 33% in 28 years, and economic challenges occasioned by the fuel subsidy removal. According to the report, about 3 million poor and vulnerable households have benefited from the 800 million palliative loan. Of these beneficiaries, 700,000 households were from rural areas and about 2.5 million households were from urban areas. The extension seeks to realign project timelines and enhance the efficacy of the National Social Safety Net Program scale-up, adding that 1,652 urban wards had been covered through the targeting system developed under the project. The government indicated that since its start, about 30 million beneficiaries have been covered by social safety net programs, and about 3 million poor and vulnerable households have received shock response cash transfers as of May 2024. But has this program been truly realized or felt by an average Nigerian? Jide Akintunde, an economist and chief editor of Financial Times publication, Nigeria Responds.
The truth of the matter is that in terms of scale, there is really no evidence that that fund has been disbursed. Perhaps there were some people here and there who received some inconsequential amounts given the rate of inflation and general price increases in the country. So we cannot tell. But what is very evident is that poverty is deepening in Nigeria and the number of vulnerable citizens are increasing by the day. So whatever intervention this fund is supposed to have made, maybe it did to some extent, but it really did not dent poverty and the impact of it in the country in the past 1 year.
So far, only 39.38% of the entire loan has been released to Nigeria, as there is a pending balance of about $485 million with an interest charge of 1.25% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance.
Ogibirika reporting. Meanwhile, the government of Togo says it welcomes the progress made in the Human Development Index HDI ranking. The country remains in first place in the UEMOA area for the fifth consecutive year and ranks fourth in ECOWAS after Cape Verde, Ghana, and Nigeria. Lomé, which went from 0.539 in 2021 to 2022 to 0.54 in 2023 to 2024, states that the success reflects the results of the economic policies and reforms implemented by the authorities. Sandra Ablamba Johnson, Minister and Secretary General of the Presidency, hailed our country's performance, attributing the success to Togo's economic resilience and substantial improvement in the quality of life of its citizens. According to Johnson, in terms of peace and security, Togo plays a leading role in the region, actively contributing to maintaining stability through its commitment to peacekeeping operations. This proactive approach has earned the country international admiration for its leadership and commitment to lasting peace.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
Well, from Banjul, WADR's Sankule Janko joins us with a summary of screaming and banner headlines from the Gambian national dailies.
Hello there and welcome to this edition of the Press Review. Let's begin today's Press Review with the Fourier newspaper, and the lead story on the Fourier newspaper today reads, Police used live ammunition in the fast Njaka Choi shooting. That's the lead story on the Fourier newspaper today. Global Forum engages communities practicing traditional slavery in the Gambia with photo of elders and a lot of people sitting under a tree. That is the other story on the Fourier newspaper. This one reads, Gambia gender parity scores increased, but, well, that's another story on the Fourier newspaper today. National Assembly to commence second ordinary session next week with the photo of the clerk of the Assembly, Mr. Cisse. National Audit Office reveals a deficit of about $42 million federated pension scheme. That's another one. And this other one reads, Senegal to receive funding for production of vaccines. Let's move on to the Point newspaper for today. And the lead story on the Point newspaper reads, hundreds died during Hajj amid intense heat. That is the lead story on the Point newspaper with a photo of pilgrims in Mecca. Of course, recently, a Gambian has been reported to be among those who died during the pilgrimage. Police suspect in routine patrol with the photo of the police spokesperson, that is Modu Sisao. Police urge public vigilance amid spat of recent robberies. Of course, that's related to the shooting of a suspect by the Gambia police force. This one reads, search in Senegalese Liberté 6 prison turns violent. Gambia Revenue Authority, that's GRA, warns against failure to use digital tax stamp. Of course, this was introduced with a view to, detecting illegal activities involving the Gambia Revenue Authority. This other one reads, NRA, that is the National Road Authority, concludes inspection of government-funded road projects. Let's take a look at the final newspaper for today, and that is the Standard newspaper. And the lead story on the Standard newspaper reads, Gambian diaspora discuss opposition coalition for 2026. Quite interesting there. But that is the lead story on the Standard newspaper. Gang raided by police confess to robbing several women using taxis. That is another story on the Standard newspaper. And this other one reads, Gambian Swede MP says government excesses worrying. This other one reads, Egypt to back Gambia in agriculture. Let's take a look at one or two stories that are non-Gambian related. And the first one reads, Guinea-Bissau partially closes border with Senegal over classes. And this other one reads, President Zelensky addresses Ukraine peace summit. I'm afraid these are the major stories making headlines on Gambian dailies. And it's back to you in the studio.
Many thanks, Sankule Janko.
Politics,
Analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Our guest is Professor Charles Wisong, a health professional and head of the Vaccine Preventable Diseases Program at the WHO Regional Office for Africa. Professor Wisong, in this brief chat with WADR's Demba Amara, underscores the priority areas for Africa and its population regarding vaccine production. His critical assessment comes on the commencement of the Gavi EU and France Joint Summit in Paris. Take a listen.
The first priority, I think, is that we have an ambition that from now by 2030, every African, whoever they are, wherever they live, shall have access to the vaccines that they need for good health. and well-being. What that means is, in practice, is that by 2030, we would want at least 90% of Africans, 90% of the population in every African country to be vaccinated for all the vaccines that they need. In terms of vaccine manufacturing, currently Africa manufactures less than 1% of the vaccines that are needed on the continent. So the ambition and the priority for Africa, as fixed by the African Union, is that by 2040, we will be able to manufacture on African soil at least 60% of the vaccines that are needed in Africa.
And how can Gavi help Africa to access to the sovereignty in terms of producing vaccines?
Gavi is a very important partner. Let me just start by what Gavi is and what their experience is. Since the birth of Gavi in 2000, Gavi has become one of the biggest global buyers of vaccines, collaborating very closely with vaccine manufacturers to shape the vaccine market. So how can Gavi help Africa to achieve the vaccine independence? Given its experience, Gavi can be a natural partner to help trace the path for Africa towards an ecosystem of sustainable vaccine manufacturing. And this 20th of June 2024, Gavi will launch, in collaboration with the African Union, in collaboration with the French government, what is called the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator, AFMA. And this would provide about $1 billion during the next 10 years to support the vaccine manufacturers on the African continent.
Professor Charles Wisonge, head of the Vaccine Preventable Diseases Program at the WHO Regional Office for Africa. And in the world of sports, Super Eagles of Nigeria have fallen by 8 places in the latest FIFA rankings, moving to 38 globally following a dismal outing in the race for the 2026 World Cup. Nigeria lost to Benin Republic for the first time and had before then drawn South Africa. All games in the 2026 World Cup qualifiers for Africa, leaving their hopes of reaching the competition hanging in the balance. In FIFA's latest ranking released on Thursday, Super Eagles are now 5th in Africa, falling 2 steps behind on the continental pecking order. Morocco moved up 1 place at the best team in Africa, placing the 12th globally. They are followed by Senegal, 18th position, Egypt 36, and Côte d'Ivoire at 37th in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th respectively on the continental rankings. And that's how we wrap up this edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Christian Mukidi and Maudo Juf for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook at WADR English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is WADR's Environment Flagship Program, Enviroscope. I am Abdullahi Hassan. Good afternoon.